It sold over 8 million copies. It got 9 Game of Year awards with a budget under 8 million quid. That's Clair Obscur Expedition 33, a debut game from a French studio nobody had heard of 12 months prior, built by a team that had fit in a decent-sized pub, and it walked into every award show in 2025 and left with luck. Meanwhile, Spider-Man 2 needed roughly 240 million quid and a 1,000-person studio just to ship a competent sequel. AAA industry tells you they need 300 million quid and 6 years to make a third-person action game with a skill tree. But why don't we look at what's really going on? Alright, you lot. Let's talk about fear. Not kind where you're being chased by something with teeth. I'm talking proper fear. Corporate boardroom fear. Kind where a room full of people in expensive shoes look at spreadsheet and decide that safest thing they can do is make exact same game as last year, but with slightly better puddles. Because that's what's killing this industry. Not piracy or used game sales or even your Uncle Dave who still thinks PlayStation 2 were last good console. It's fear. Rami Ismail, Glanbia co-founder and one of the sharpest minds in independent development, hosted a work group at DevGAMM Madeira Games Summit back in May this year. Title of it were brutally honest. We're moving fast and losing what made us good. Group included designers, producers, publishers, and people from all across the development chain. Their conclusion was simple and damning. Games industry's biggest creative problem right now is fear. Studios are optimising for market research and trend chasing instead of taste, building games designed to offend nobody and excite nobody. And they're doing it because every executive in room is terrified of being one who greenlit flop. Ismail said many of more fearful reflexes in industry aim to sand down rough edges of creative work. Creative, homogenous and bland products that check out boxes but are insincere, uninspiring and uninteresting. Then he dropped line that should be printed on a banner and hung in every publisher's office on planet. Industry's fear of risk is currently the largest risk it faces. Sounds like a clever soundbite, but it's backed up by hard data. Workgroup identified 4 creative pillars that successful games share: creating coherence, identifying weakness, selling dream, and connecting dots. None of those require 300 million quid or 1,000 developers. What they require is taste, conviction, and willingness to back your creative team instead of running everything through a focus group until all flavour has been boiled out. Group weren't soft about it either. Ismail said, and I'm paraphrasing here, that there are too many cowards using all wrong metrics controlling too many critical levers. And until industry figures out how to put taste and creativity back at top, it's going to be stuck in the same loop. Acting from fear creates exactly what you're afraid of. And that's not some motivational poster bollocks. It's observable market reality. Just look at numbers. Because if this industry loves hope more than fear, it's pretending numbers don't say what they clearly say. Clair Obscur Expedition 33 were made for under 8 million quid. Sold 1 million copies in 3 days. 3.3 million in 33 days. And 8 million copies inside a year. It won Game of Year at Game Awards, at BAFTAs, at every major show going. Its second game in history after Baldur's Gate 3 to sweep every major Game of Year category. And it did all of this as a debut title from a studio called Samfall Interactive that most people couldn't have named day before launch. Creative director Guillaume Broche, sorry if I butchered that, said all point were to prove that indie studios could make prestige turn-based RPGs that major publishers had abandoned. And boy, did they. For context, you could fund roughly 30 Clair Obscur games for the price of one Spider-Man 2. Then there's Peak, with 7 developers. 4 from Landfall, 3 from Aggro Crab. They met in Seoul for a month, built core at game during what were essentially a game jam, and kept refining it remotely until launch in June 2025. Total budget were under 160 grand. It hit 1 million sales in its first week, 2 million in 9 days. And by mid-July, it were past 5 million. By August, after a 38% discount, cleared 9.7 million copies, with over $55 million in revenue. Studio head Nick Kamen admitted they were ready to go on holiday after shipping it. They thought it'd be a nice little side project, and it outsold most at AAA releases at year, but it cost less than a decent house in Surrey. And Balatro, made by one person using pseudonym Local Thunk. No studio, No publisher marketing machine at launch. It sold 5 million copies by January 2025, won 3 Game Awards. And it's available everywhere from Steam to mobile to Apple Arcade. It costs whatever local thunk's time were worth of its development period, which is to say functionally no compared to what industry insists its minimum viable spend. When Jason Schreier reported earlier this year that AAA budgets in North America were now floating around $300 million or more, he wasn't exaggerating. That's what big publishers are spending, and they're spending it on games that more often than not feel like they were designed by a committee that were itself designed by a different committee. Shawn Layden, former president of Sony Interactive Entertainment America, came out swinging a couple of weeks ago and said what plenty of people have been thinking. Said we've lost a lot of variety in games. He listed off genres and they all sounded the same. Looter shooter, hero shooter, extraction shooter, shooter. Then he asked a question that should haunt every publisher. Where's next Katamari Damacy? And his explanation were honest. When you could make a game for 5 or 6 million quid back on PlayStation 1, you'd do 10 games and if 3 of them didn't work, fine, you learned something. Now, when every throw at dice is in triple-digit millions, risk tolerance goes to about 0. To borrow his phrase, nobody wants to fund Unicorn Ballet in space. And the result is a wall of games that all look, feel and play like game next to them on shelf. And he's not wrong. And it's actually refreshing to hear it from someone who ran the show at PlayStation, even if it would have been more useful to hear it when he was still in a position to actually do something about it. But AAA responds to this problem into make smaller, tighter, more creative games. It's to claim that generative AI is going to fix everything. Cost too high? AI will sort it. Games too big? AI will shrink them. Games too bland? AI will also somehow fix that, apparently, despite being trained on exact same homogenized slop that's causing problem. Xavier Nelson Jr. from Strange Scaffold pointed out that for all people saying AI will let studios finally make big games faster and cheaper as costs go exponentially up, unspoken decision that's already been made is that rather than ask whether the size of the game is feasible, whether it provides thing that's most meaningful for a player, they've decided that sheer scope is god of their development process and must be fulfilled at all costs. That's bit nobody wants to say out loud. Budgets aren't high because games are expensive to make, because publishers decided games need to be massive and then work backwards from that assumption. Nobody forced anyone to make a 100-hour open world with 400 collectibles and a map size of Belgium. That were a choice. And instead of questioning choice, they're looking for technology to make choice cheaper, while simultaneously laying off humans who actually know how to make games interesting. Strange Scaffold ships roughly 3 games a year without touching generative AI. Nelson's response to claim that AI is necessary was skill issue, and he's earned right to say it. His studio runs lean, ships consistently, and every game has a distinct creative identity because the design production process around what each game actually needs instead of bolting every project onto the same bloated pipeline. That's what discipline looks like, not a 300 million quid sledgehammer looking for a nail. And Ismail's work group gets really interesting because they explicitly push back against toxic auteur model. This isn't about letting one creative genius drag an exhausted team behind them like tin cans behind a wedding car. The group were clear that brave decisions need to be sustainable decisions. You can have creative vision without burning people out, and fund risk without funding chaos. Clair Obscur had a 4-year development cycle with a focused team and a clearly defined scope. Peak had a 1-month jam with 7 people and a goal of making something fun. Both worked because someone had a vision and people around them had sense to support it instead of smothering it with market research. And consumer side of this matters too. Look at what people actually buy when they gain a genuine choice. Clair Obscur wants a safe bet for anyone. A turn-based JRPG from a French indie studio with no track record? On paper, in a publisher's risk assessment meeting, that gets killed before launch. But it had a clear artistic vision, a coherent identity, and courage to be specifically itself rather than vaguely everything. Same with Balatro. Nobody in the right mind would have greenlit a poker roguelike card game with abstract joker multipliers if they'd run it through standard AAA approval process. It don't fit any proven market template. It don't have a live service roadmap. It don't have cosmetic microtransactions. And it's one of the most successful indie games ever made. Gamers aren't problem here. Gamers have proven over and over that they will throw money at something that feels genuine. Problem is layer of corporate infrastructure sitting between creative teams and audience. A layer that's so consumed by fear that it can't tell difference between managing risk and strangling opportunity. Every breakout success story at past 2 years shared same DNA. A specific creative vision. A team that believed in it. A budget proportionate to what game actually needed. And somebody somewhere who had guts to say, yeah, when spreadsheet said no. That's it. It's not some secret complicated formula, just apparently too scary for AAA games industry to handle anymore. Fear is disease, and courage is cure. Not reckless courage. You don't need to burn boats and see what happens, but kind that says we know what this game is. We know who it's for. And we're not going to sand off every edge until it's just another smooth grey blob on shelf next to all other smooth grey blobs. Industry needs people with taste in positions of power and willingness to back them when spreadsheet looks uncomfortable. Because right now, most dangerous thing in gaming is another 300 million quid sequel that plays it so safe it's already forgotten before its servers go offline. Now, if you like this video, YouTube says you'll like this and next. So go check that out, and I'll see you there, you magnificent.